Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mark Dunfried, for this introduction, especially for pronouncing my name right. It's not easy at all, and most people get it wrong, so thank you. I'm very glad to be here at this event, especially because this is exactly what I do on a daily basis at the embassy. And I wanted to start off with a definition. So cultural diplomacy is known as the soft power that a government has and is used as a complement for traditional diplomacy. The term soft power was coined by Joseph Nye, a professor at Harvard, in 2004. He defined the notion as the ability to get what you want through cooptation and attraction. I think the key word is attraction here. And I always like to highlight the meaning of this term because we have to understand the purpose behind cultural diplomacy to understand what the government wants to portray through culture. While all nations have implemented cultural diplomacy to some extent in their relationships with other nations, each has a distinct message it wants to convey and different reasons to do so. In the case of Colombia, we try to place emphasis in two main objectives. One, to an external audience or an international audience, by showing the world that we are no longer the nation that we were a decade ago, through our rich cultural, unique traditions, and a diverse people and landscape. We are now a new Colombia with so much more to show the world in economics, political, and social sphere. And here I wanted to stop because it's a coincidence that I had the person speaking before me that talked about Colombia because he portrayed Colombia exactly in the way that as a government now, we want to show people that we're no longer that country. We don't longer have the violence that we had a decade or 2 decades ago. We're a completely different country, and we now have coined the term a new Colombia, because now we're seeing that the image that people had is a completely different image, and we're trying to get people to come to Colombia. As he said, he should get journalists, but we're trying to get every single person possible to come to Colombia to see the new reality that we have in our country. The second main objective that we have in cultural diplomacy is for an internal audience. So we show our youth through sports and cultural diplomacy what the world has to offer by giving them a wider view of their horizons and giving them tools so they can become leaders in their community. So this new Colombia, and here I had a little speech about the press. We always have to deal with the press that they always show the negative aspect of a situation and not the positive action, which was what the gentleman over there mentioned, that it's very hard to get the media to talk about the positive things. So as a government, we have to take it into our hands to do this. And one of the ways that we get much more impact is through cultural diplomacy. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Colombia so you can understand what I'm trying to show you about this change that we've seen in the last decade. The combination of economic growth and targeted social programs has generated a significant reduction in poverty and inequality. Poverty has decreased from 55% in 2000 to 30% last year. That's a 20% decrease, which is enormous. We have one-digit extreme poverty and reduced inequality. Nearly 3 million Colombians have entered middle classes. 91% of Colombians have now health care coverage. You can imagine, when I was studying, I studied here in the United States and I studied international relations, and one of the topics that we discussed at one point was failed states. And the professor at the time, she mentioned that Colombia is not a failed state, but very close to being a failed state. If you can see the numbers that I'm going to continue reading, that is no longer the case. How can a failed state have 91% healthcare coverage? It's a completely different reality that we're facing now than we were a decade ago. So I'm going to continue reading some of the facts. We have the highest job creation rate as percent of labor force in Latin America. Unemployment rate is at 9%. Formal sector employment is growing faster than informal sector. And while formal job employment is growing at 8%, the informal jobs are decreasing by 2%. So we're getting a lot of our employment in the informal sector is transferring to the formal sector and seeing the benefit in that. We have regained investment grade status, and our outlook has been recently upgraded to positive by major credit agencies. So we're also seeing a huge influx of foreign direct investment in the country, and that also has helped with the progress and the change that I'm discussing. Our healthy growth rates and expanding middle classes have attracted leading companies from the United States and elsewhere, which are choosing Colombia as a strategic location for their international expansion. Infrastructure. Under the leadership of President Santos, we launched the most ambitious infrastructure program of our history, fourth generation of concessions, a set of $26 billion worth of road concessions with the highest standards that will transform our country's competitiveness. A modern country increasingly integrated with global markets. We have signed free trade agreements with 44 countries, including the United States, the European Union, Switzerland, and Canada. This new Colombia is creating significant opportunities for our partners throughout the world. During 2013, U.S. exports to Colombia exceeded for the first time in history $18 billion, growing at a 14% rate. From Colombian side, even though some of the exports have been affected by reduced international prices, we have seen important growth in sectors such as flowers, fruit and apparel, and aluminum products. Moreover, we're seeing an increased number of Colombian companies entering the U.S. market. So that is basically the reality right now in terms of economics in our country. As you can see, the progress has been tremendous, and the expectation is that we will continue to grow at a 6% rate, which is, for all standards, a very good rate, and for Latin America especially. So I'll go back to what I mentioned before. One of the main challenges in our embassy is to inform people about these changes so they have a more accurate perception of present-day Colombia. And I have found that one of the most useful tools in doing so has been through cultural diplomacy. Every year, each of our 61 embassies worldwide develop a cultural agenda that complements the embassy's objectives in positioning Colombia as a contemporary country rich in its cultural ecosystem, biodiverse, and committed to enhancing culture as a vehicle in the development of its citizens. Colombia, as I think it was mentioned before in regards to the United States, it's not as big as the United States, but it's also a very big country, and it's very diverse, and part of this diversity comes from our natural resources. Colombia's geographical distribution is very diverse, and you get people from all different types of climates and backgrounds, and this makes our country extremely diverse, and you can see the expression especially in our cultural diaspora. So I'm going to read some of the facts about our geographical diversity. Colombia is one of the world's 17 mega diverse countries and has the highest biodiversity per square kilometer. We have the 14% of the world's flora and fauna, and 7% of the Amazon rainforest, even though our country's territory only represents 0.7% of the world's continental surface. Ethnic groups represent 13.7% of Colombia's population, which comprehends indigenous, Afro-Colombian, racial, and Rom communities. There are 93 indigenous groups across the country and 635 indigenous reserves. We have 68 native tongues and are spoken by 850,000 people. So you can imagine if you can locate Colombia on the map and see its size, it's amazing that we actually have been able to preserve 68 native tongues. And this is just to show you how diverse the country actually is. We're not just a violent country, there's so much more to offer the world. And I think the ambassador from Trinidad and Tobago gave very good examples of how the U.S. helps to, how do you say that? Sorry. The U.S. is very good at implementing programs for when embassies come to the U.S., they can get engaged and show their country through the American programs that are already established. As you mentioned, Passport DC is an amazing program. I would also like to highlight the Folklife Festival, which will be coming on to the mall in the next couple of weeks. I think it's around July 4th. And Colombia was able to participate in 2011, and we were able, through those 2 weeks, show Washington, and everybody was visiting Washington, and I think it's approximately 1 million people that passed through the mall to see this, what Colombia has to offer. And during that year that Colombia was the main guest at that festival, What happened was Colombia researched different aspects of its culture, and it was a process that took 3 years that even taught us Colombians what we actually had to offer the world. In our foreign affairs ministry, the impact that this project had was tremendous because we didn't, even us Colombians didn't know what our potential was in showing the world with all our diversity. We found that number, that 68 native tongues, through this program. So it's one of those amazing opportunities countries have here in the US to get engaged with what is already being offered in Washington. Another project that we have here in DC is Gastro diplomacy. It is another way to successfully tell our story of Colombia and its diversity through gastro diplomacy. Colombian cuisine will continue to surprise people because we come from a culture where sharing a meal is a very important part of our daily lives. Those of you who have traveled through Colombia know that its national cuisine is as diverse as its people. Each part of the country has its local ingredients and traditional ways of preparing food. This is one of the many reasons why Anthony Bourdain has had 2 of his shows filmed in Colombia. He loves our food and the plurality of our dishes and ingredients. In our gastro diplomacy program, we bring renowned chefs to cook with local chefs and create a collaborative meal that brings together the 2 cultures. Last year, we brought 2 Colombian chefs to cook at Rogue 24 with Chef R.J. Cooper, a James Beard Foundation winner for Best Chef in the United States. They worked together for 3 days, sharing experiences and techniques, which culminated in a 4-hour-long dinner where guests were able to savor more than 12 dishes. Coming together to share a meal is a great way to cross cultural divides because it creates an understanding between the 2 cultures through an extraordinary experience that is savoring wonderfully well-prepared food. Another program that we have is in the film industry because it has a great impact through cultural diplomacy and our efforts in this discipline have been twofold. At the embassy level, we have found ways of showcasing Colombian films in different venues nationwide. For example, we recently gave our support to Colombian Film Festival in New York that has been running for 2 years with great success, giving Colombian films producers and actors an international venue to showcase their work. At a national level, we have also made great strides. Since 2003, Colombia has implemented a new law that promotes the cinematography industry by creating a film development fund. This initiative has had a big influence in Colombia's film industry because as more people come to work in Colombia, our local industry has been benefited from the knowledge and experience that working with international groups can bring. Before the film law was implemented, an average of 4 movies was produced annually in Colombia, and from then on, the film production in Colombia has blossomed. In 2012, thanks to this film development fund, 23 films were released. This effort was later complemented by the filming law of 2012 that invites film producers from all over the world to film in our country by offering generous incentives to film producers, a refund of 40% on film-related expenses, and a refund of 20% on logistics for films partially or totally produced in Colombia. While this has made our cinematography industry flourish, it has also allowed for international viewers to get to know a more realistic image of Colombia, because nowadays films that are supposed to take place in Colombia now actually take place. And I don't know if anyone here has seen Romance in the Stone, starring Michael Douglas by any chance. It's like an 80s, 90s movie. That film was supposed to take place in Colombia, but I think it was actually filmed in Mexico, and you see Mayan ruins in the background. And when Colombians see this, it's astonishing because it doesn't portray our country at all. And they were showing like fights and action and everything, which was normal to portray Colombia like this, but not in Mayan ruins. And now with this film industry, more people are coming to film in Colombia, and at least they're able to show a background of our reality, which at least it's a great step. So we're very proud of that, and hopefully you will all be seeing Colombian films in the future and change your mind of what Colombia has to offer. The other point that I wanted to make here is the sports and cultural exchanges. Since 2011, our Ministry of Foreign Affairs has given special attention to sports and cultural exchanges to prevent the recruitment of minors in illegally armed groups and also to promote the government's efforts in social inclusion and peaceful coexistence through cultural and sports-related activities. The objective of this initiative are aimed at offering youth living in the poorest municipalities of Colombia the possibility to strengthen their athletic development, get to know other cultures, be in contact with social inclusion programs so they can build their life projects. We want our youth to know that what their potentials are so that they can see a benefit in avoiding negative influences that can be present in their life. We want to form strong local leaders that can be influenced in their community and vocal in promoting a positive message for other youths. The delegations for these exchanges are chosen from government and non-government established social inclusion projects to represent Colombia abroad in their respective disciplines, which have included soccer, baseball, table tennis, skating, rugby, volleyball, basketball, track and field, cycling — we do not have cricket in Colombia — and musical instruments. In the United States, we have given sports and cultural diplomacy special attention by making it one of the main working groups in our yearly high-level dialogue with the State Department. This is basically once a year, a high-level group from Colombia comes to the US or vice versa. High-level group from the US goes to Colombia, and for one day we have, I think it's about 5 working groups, and we discuss what we want to do in the future, how we want to work together. And this has had a great impact in our diplomacy in general, but the one that I work with in cultural diplomacy, it has been tremendous because we've even gotten financial support to bring youths to the United States and be able to see what the world has to offer. So this has been very, very important for us. Since its implementation in 2011, more than 51 youths have partaken in exchanges, visiting more than 28 countries. And while the number of participants is still fairly small, their impact has generated a tremendous opportunities in their community, because all the experience they have abroad, they come back to Colombia and share this with their colleagues, and they become local leaders. So we started in 2001 with this initiative, but we expect to get an impact throughout the years to come in sports diplomacy and cultural diplomacy. And if you have any questions, I would be more than happy to take them.
Thank you very much for an excellent presentation, and I'm sure you've inspired some questions or comments regarding Colombian cultural diplomacy. We'll start with our next speaker, Ms. Yvonne Kaplan. Nice to meet you.
Well, good morning or good afternoon. My name is Yvonne Kaplan at George Washington University, and I was very intrigued about the use of film and cultural diplomacy in Colombia, knowing that I think it still remains one of the most expensive endeavors. And so I'd like to know, how is the government of Colombia backing up? Is it providing resources? Is it giving the money, some of the funds so that these filmmakers can actually do their work?
Yes, there's 2 ways that we're helping. One, as the example that I mentioned, which is a film festival that's happening here in the U.S. that we help out. It's their 2nd year, but we helped them out last year to get started, and we still are helping them this year, so they're able to get like an international platform to showcase their work. It was in Tribeca Film Festival, so it's a good venue. It got a lot of media attention, so that was very good. Back home, we have the Film Development Fund, so that's direct financing that the government gives to film producers back home. And the other initiative that they have is when international film producers come to Colombia, they get rebates, 40% for general expenses and 20% for logistics. So that's an incentive for them to come to Colombia, but there's how do you say that? Like there's a double reason to do it. We want them to come to Colombia, but we also want them to hire Colombians. So if they come and they hire Colombians to help them out in their film, we give them these rebates because we know that we want to show the positive side of Colombia, but we want our film industry to grab that knowledge so they can as well improve in the future. So those are the 2 ways we're helping.
If not, then maybe I have a short question, just something I've been interested in. What we see in Brussels today is the beginnings of a new kind of cultural diplomacy, which is getting to be more multilateral than unilateral. And I think in a place like Europe, you can imagine that. They had the interruption of the Second World War, and for many reasons, I think they're working together as a team in a fairly effective way, economically and more in terms of culture. There's an organization in the European Union you may have heard of called UNIQUE, which is actually a network of the national cultural institutions, such as Goethe, British Council, Alliance Française, working together in collaborative efforts. This seems like something that would be impossible as we look at Latin America, where we see there's so many really unique countries kind of doing their own thing. So, obviously in Mercosur, there are a few beginnings here and there. So my question to you is, do you see already examples of multilateral cultural diplomacy from a Colombian point of view, where Colombia works with other countries on certain projects? And could you see a larger potential for this in the future for Colombia, but also for the region, this idea of multilateral cultural diplomacy?
Yes. We have, it's called the ASIA, which is like the Ibero-American Cultural Attaches. So I'm the representation of Colombia in that group, and it's all South America, Spain, and Portugal. And we have monthly meetings, and we organize, it depends each year, but mostly we have a film festival in February, March, and a photo exhibition in November. And we do try to work together. We do share experience each month. So it's those big projects. Even if we don't have only 2 events per year, we do meet every month because, as you know, when you're working with so many people, it's harder to move forward than if you're working alone. But it is a great experience, and we are joining all our forces together in this group. And I think that would be an excellent example, that you can go to one of these exhibitions and get to know photographers from all over Latin America, Spain, and Portugal.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. I was just thinking.
Cultural attaché. I'm representing the ambassador today.
I'm sorry, please. Cultural attaché. Okay, I'm so sorry. I thought
No, it's fine.
you were the ambassador. Okay, but thank you so much for the disclosure made on Colombia, on the new disposition you're trying to make. And I think we had the same problem too after fighting war for 14 years to erase the fact that we were no more fighting war was difficult. Mm-hmm. So we devised some strategies. Our president is like a celebrity, being the first woman in Africa. So we used part of her celebrity status to market the new Liberia. So she was speaking at Harvard and going to the UN and going to places and speaking and making speeches and getting involved with a whole lot of stuff. I'm happy that Colombia has come this far, but I'm not too sure, maybe I may be wrong, whether you have a cultural diplomacy program engaged in Africa, all right? Because I think you may be aware that Africa has emerged now as the continent, all right? Too many things are happening. The continent is moving so fast, and maybe you have some programs, or you intend to have some programs in Africa on your cultural diplomacy program, so people begin to recalibrate and rethink as to what is the new Colombia and how Africa can get involved in that. Thank you.
So I don't know the details exactly, but I know we do, because we do have embassies in Africa, and what happens is that we have a yearly cultural agenda that each embassy has. So all the work that I do here, there's someone in our embassies in Africa doing the same. So each year they'll propose to the ministry the programs they want to have throughout the year. They get approved, and they carry them out. I don't know the details exactly because I haven't been deployed in Africa, but each embassy has a cultural agenda in place.